as we prepare to say hello to Eric Weddle next week. We'll be swabbing for the Bone Marrow Red Street Adams Jeep in Aberdeen, and for our friends at There Goes My Hero. And we've got football in Cleveland. Luke Jones will be on the backfields in Owings Mills all week, as will I on Wednesday and Friday, getting you ready for Browns and Ravens. Meantime, there's a little baseball going on every night at Fenway Park. And, of course, the homestand begins on Thursday at Camden Yards. Everything at stake here as the Orioles go to Boston, and then they're going to be seeing more of Boston, more of Toronto, more of New York before it's all over with. This guy sees a lot of baseball at Fenway Park. He is the longtime beat writer and columnist and a witness to 3 World Series titles per his Twitter. He is Ron Chemelis of the Springfield Republican, and you can follow his journey out on Twitter, Ron Chemelis. That's Chimelis. I know everybody up in New England's excited about Springsteen and Garoppolo, but at heart, it's another pennant race, and the Red Sox want to finish in first place here, Ron.
Absolutely. This September, the Red Sox and the Patriots share space, and that hasn't happened since 2013 in September. They finished last the last 2 years, but right now they're in first, and it's a 4-team race. It's very, very interesting.
All right, so make the case that the Red Sox are indeed the best team. They have not spent a whole lot of time in first place this year. I believe when the Pomeranz trade happened, there would be a difference maker. That's up for debate, and certainly the Red Sox have made some other moves, but they just hit the ball, and the pitching has slowly, during the course of the year, gotten better and improved in virtually every way, and including getting Uehara back.
Well, I agree with all of that. I think the case that I'd make for the Red Sox being the best team besides the standings is that they're finishing with a flourish. They had a stretch very recently of 22 road games in 28 days, and that was, to me, a make or break, and they did pretty well. They didn't sweep through it, but in this division, you don't have to. And they've slugged their way to victories in a lot of games. The pitching wasn't that good. So they go into September with a bit of a sprint. I don't see that from the other teams with the exception of the Yankees.
Certainly feels like with Price and Porcello and the amount of money that was invested in those guys at the top of the rotation. These are the kinds of games where they're taking the ball, and you expect September magic. You expect them to look like guys that are going to be pitching in October. And I know that's been in question all year. Hell, it's still in question. I mean, if the team were to falter here in the next couple of weeks, there are plenty of teams coming to get them at this point.
Oh, there's no question about that. There's no room for error. All these teams are playing each other. It's a tough schedule for the Red Sox. But Price has won 6 straight. Porcello's won 20 games. You know, a lot of these questions that people have had all season are dissipating to some extent. They're pitching well now. Pomeranz has been pretty good. He got off to a rough start with the Red Sox, but he's been a pretty good addition. Not great. They seem to be finding the right formula at the right time, and they do hit the ball. Nobody hits it, including Toronto. Nobody has hit the ball quite like the Red Sox this season.
Yeah, I mean, even the Orioles with, Trumbo's outsized numbers and Machado on his way to a big contract, Scope emerging. But you look up and down this Red Sox lineup, and I know back in spring training I was talking to you and a bunch of other Red Sox beat writers about who the best player on the team would be. Several said Mookie Betts. He was the emerging guy, and they were still sort of waiting on Bradley, and Bogarts had a little breakout, and, Ramirez and Sandoval are sort of forever tied together by those contract signings. I don't think anybody really would have seen David Ortiz with 45 doubles and 32 bombs and over 100 R. I mean, it would have been as likely in spring training to have people say, well, he'll look more like A-Rod or Teixeira would this year. Hasn't been the case at all. He's been the best player in baseball.
He's been very, very good. There are people who think that Betts could make a case for MVP. Partly is the fact that he plays such great defense. But this team emotionally, offensively, does revolve around David Ortiz. And I agree with you. I expected a decent year if his health held up. Nobody expected this. I'm not even sure Ortiz expected this. And he looks like he'll be able to get to the finish line. He's been saying all year that his feet hurt, they bother him. He's not going to change his mind about retiring because of that. But he is finishing with a flourish and they've been careful with him. They've rested him in interleague games against a couple of lefties. He seems to have enough to get to the finish line, and that's huge for this team.
By the way, Ramirez, quietly, if this were just him in a vacuum, not being judged against 6 other big bats in the lineup, he's been okay, man. I mean, he really has been a big part of the solution where maybe last year he was perceived as being a part of the problem, right?
All true, and I agree with that. He's actually been a bit of an understated player, which for Hanley Ramirez in Boston, that's almost impossible to conceive. But what he's also done, he's played a pretty good first base. He has solved what was a huge defensive problem of what to do with Hanley Ramirez. He's fit in rather well there. Certainly hasn't hurt him, and that's kind of solved the paradox of what to do with this guy. Sandoval's injury solved the other paradox because he's out. But Ramirez has been a contributor.
Ron Chamelis covering the Red Sox and Boston sports for 3 decades now at the Springfield Republican. You can join him out on Twitter at Ron Chamelis. That's Chimelis. Before I get to the Orioles, and certainly we'll get to the Blue Jays as well, it's worth noting what the Yankees have done here since they've dealt away all the money, all the players, thrown out the legends, thrown out the Hall of maybe Cooperstown in A-Rod. And somehow these young guys have turned it on quietly and with very little pressure in the Bronx. And as I've said all week, over the next 3 weeks, no one is going to do more to solve who's going to be in the playoffs than the Yankees, because if they're really good, they're going to eliminate teams to be in the playoffs themselves. And if they're really bad, as maybe people thought they were going to be, it's going to open the door for one of these other 3 teams to beat them up a little bit, because the Yankees are doing nothing but playing these teams.
Well, I don't think anybody's going to beat up on the Yankees. There is a refreshing attitude about the Yankees that hasn't been seen. Because as you said, this was a stale team. It was an old team. It was a tired team. And this is a different operation right now. Their management basically gave up on the season in the middle, and the players have had a different view of the whole thing. And they're not out of it. They'd have to get very hot. It's tough to pass 3 teams this late in the season. But when you're playing everybody crisscross, it's not impossible. They'll have a major say-so on the end of the season, and you can't rule them out as a contender.
Well, certainly for this weekend, I mean, after the Orioles leave, it doesn't get keyed down. It gets keyed up when the Yankees come in with a chance of really creating havoc this weekend at Fenway Park.
Well, if nothing else, they could ruin the Red Sox dreams, and that's what Yankee fans dream for. And this is going to be, the Yankee-Red Sox series in the last few years it's been passionate, but not what it was. It wasn't that tempest of emotion that it had. First of all, the Red Sox were in last place most of the time. The Yankees were up and down. It just wasn't the same. I do think that this weekend we'll sense much of what we used to sense, the importance for both teams. In September, every game, every pitch matters. That's what the games will probably take about 6 hours each. But that's what the Yankee-Red Sox teams are all about, and that's coming back this weekend.
All right, so the Orioles are going to spend a few days there, and of course the Red Sox are going to visit Camden Yards next week as well. The Orioles have thought for long stretches of the year that they were a first-place team, because they were. Certainly the pitching has been dramatically better over the last couple of weeks than we even thought possible, with Gausman sort of settling down, Bundy in the rotation, Tillman now coming back. But really this Ubaldo Jimenez that we do not recognize the last couple of weeks, and certainly something that Mr. Angelos and Duquette paid for a few years ago, finally seeing some benefits to give him the ball every 5th day.
Well, I think that's all true, and the Orioles are working in the weeds. They're 2 games out. That seems like a lot in this division, because there's so many teams passing each other on a nightly basis. But they could leave this series in first place. They are getting very good pitching. They got a solid team. I think top to bottom they're as good on talent as anybody else. Buck Showalter, nobody really questions his managerial skills. So if they can at least take I think they have to take 2 out of 3 in this series to really move forward, but they certainly are capable.
Huge weekend over the weekend for the Red Sox and the Blue Jays, getting it on up in Toronto, and weird games, right? Like scoring a lot of runs, and then much like the Orioles, you lose a 3-2 ball game. The Orioles had that happen last week. I know the Red Sox have had that happen a couple of times out in Oakland and San Diego, where, nights where you don't score, you generally don't win.
Well, and it happens to every team. Red Sox fans still look at everything through a Red Sox prism. And how can we score 13 runs on Friday and we can't get the big run on Saturday? Well, that's baseball. On Sunday, the offense came back to life. That was a seesaw game. It was a huge win for them. They took the series on the road against one of the teams that they're competing against, and they pushed Toronto 2 games back. It's a puzzle because every night's different. And you can score 13, 14 runs a night and then get frozen out by a pitcher the next night. That could happen this week as well.
Porcello, for all of the fanfare and the money and sort of the off track he had last year, this year he's put it all together. We've seen Clemens, we've seen Pedro, in Boston, Kurt Schilling, some great, Tion, all that. This is as good an effort as you're ever going to see. 20 games, Labor Day weekend, he's already won. He's going to get 4 or 5 more starts here through this rotation, a chance to win 23, 24 games this year.
And how often do you see that in modern baseball? That's very true. I stopped short of putting Porcello in Pedro's category yet, or even Clemens in his prime, but you're right. When he came last year, I thought this is an under-the-radar good signing. Now, I didn't expect an $82 million contract to follow. That put him above the radar. But I said, here's a fellow that is really just coming into his prime, and they're getting him at a good time. He struggled last year for whatever reason. I felt that maybe he thinks about things too much. He's kind of a cerebral type of pitcher, and that can get in the way sometimes. But this year, he's really sorted it out. He's been fantastic. He's a Cy Young candidate, maybe a Cy Young favorite, 20 wins just after Labor Day. Nowadays, almost unheard of.
I was a guy who was big on the Pomeranz deal. I would have thought he would have looked good for the Orioles, and certainly the Orioles needed pitching at that point with Gallardo out and Jimenez faltering and Bundy in the bullpen. And, they had a lot of things going on. Gosman wasn't right. This is back in May and June, and the Red Sox pulled the early trigger on the Pomeranz deal. That wasn't a July 31st one. That one kind of came early. I know it's early to evaluate that. But he's out there, and he's taking the ball again this week, and he's a veteran presence for them at a time where he was pitching really well in April and May and June in a Padres uniform.
Well, I still think he's a good pickup. What he's not is a Cy Young pickup. I think maybe the fanfare that greeted him was a little bit too much, but let's face it, it's good to have him now. Stephen Wright is out. They'd have to find somebody else to fill Pomeranz's spot in the rotation. He's given them some good games, not entirely the consistency that you want, but it's still better to have him in this rotation and on this roster now than to not have him. And if you look at it that way, it's a good pickup for them. And I think it is a good pickup for them.
Ron, what's a bigger story, the Red Sox or Jimmy Garoppolo at this point?
Well, I'm a baseball guy, so but I don't know. Probably in New England, Jimmy Garoppolo. But if we get into the last 2 weeks of the season, the biggest story, of course, is Ortiz. With the Red Sox, is Ortiz coming down the stretch, possibly going out a winner. Garoppolo and Brady and Deflategate, there's an obsession with that. I get kind of sick of it myself. But
haven't the Red Sox won enough? I mean, you've gotten 3. How many more do you want?
Well, when you wait 86 years for the first one, 3 doesn't seem like too much. But, keep in mind they've had 2 terrible seasons back-to-back since the last one, and the fans are excited. It's not going to have the newness that it used to have. It's not going to be historic like it once was. But there's a bit of greed. Same with the Patriots. They want one more Super Bowl for Brady, and who can blame them? I still don't look at the Red Sox as a World Series favorite, but they've exceeded my expectations to this point. I really didn't see this as a playoff team in the spring like a lot of people did.
Well, the Orioles were definitely an afterthought. I mean, this whole thing has been like, a wonderful little bouquet here on this run. And I think for the whole pennant race, for these 10 teams fighting for 5 spots, and really 2 of them are locked up. I mean, Cleveland and Texas, they're going to be in the tournament. Now it's about who's going to win the division and where these wild cards are going to be. All of these other teams, I mean, I know the Orioles played the Tigers over the weekend. We seem to forget about them. I mean, for most of the year, for the Orioles fans, it was about the Blue Jays and the Red Sox. Now all of a sudden, here come the Yankees and these other wild cards. And over the weekend, we see Detroit. Detroit's going to play Minnesota 7 times. They're going to play Atlanta 3 times. I mean, some of these teams in the Central and the West have these, awful schedules the rest of the way. Meanwhile, these teams are going to beat each other up in the American League East.
That's very possible. One thing, there's about 11 teams that have a shot to get into those 5 spots. One thing about the Red Sox and their fans, with Ortiz retiring, it's not just an emotional, sentimental send-off thing. This team's going to feel and look much different next year without him in the middle of the order. So the feeling is we better grab it now because next year we're going into uncharted waters, and there is an opportunity. So there is some urgency to this season. Yeah, they have won 3 in this century, and that's great. But after this season, it's going to be a different Red Sox team. It'll be a good team, but it will be different.
He is Ron Chemelis, longtime Red Sox beat writer and columnist at the Springfield Republican. You can follow him out on Twitter at Ron Chemelis. That's Chimelis. Hey, man, enjoy the games this week. We usually this time of year, we're just waiting for the football game every Sunday. Having 6 baseball games that matter between every football game, we're like a real sports town here the next couple of weeks, Ron. It's kind of cool.
Way it ought to be in Baltimore and in Boston.
Well, there you go, man. 25 years I've been doing this, Ron. There haven't been a whole lot of Septembers that have had this much promise, so we're really excited around here. We'll be watching and following along with your work up on Twitter and at the Springfield Republican. Appreciate the time, my friend.
Thank you.
You got it. Ron Chemelis back on WNST, and you can find him out on Twitter as well as at the Springfield Republican on the interweb. You can find me out in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We come in crystal clear from wherever you are. Our morning newspaper is shipped to your email inbox at 7 a.m. each and every morning. That's powered up by our friends at Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. Still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life there. Don't forget, breaking breaking news happens first on the WNST Tech Service. That's brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis is here on Thursday, driving you home from 3 until 5 and getting you ready for Thursday Night Football, as well as the Orioles homestand. Birds come back for 11 games, on Thursday. It was 10, they added a game. Thursday against the Tampa Bay Rays. And I will be writing a blog this week about the attendance issues and the woes of the Orioles in getting fans into the stands here, even as we play the biggest games of the season and the biggest games of, I don't want to say the generation, because we had some big games here in 12 and 14, but the biggest ones are the next ones, and they still haven't won a championship, and they are certainly in line and can win the World Series this year. Where are the people? I'm going to evaluate that at WNST.net. You'll also see it out on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and Snapchat and Instagram and anywhere else we share things. You can always find me, Nasty, at WNST.net, and as well as that on our social media, streaming live on Facebook Live, as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Taos in Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.